We have foiled a terrorist attack that was planned to take place on New Year's Eve in Mint Hill, North Carolina.
They have
Now,
made
New Year's Eve,
the largest fentanyl bust in our nation's history. And we're very proud to announce today a historic Sinaloa cartel arrest. And
Federal agents just hit a city mayor's office in a massive drug raid.
05:57 a.m., Minneapolis, midwinter. The air is sharp enough to sting. A hard wind cuts down empty streets, lifting powdery snow into thin ribbons that drift across intersections and settle again like nothing happened. Streetlights glow on frozen pavement. Tires whisper on salt-crusted asphalt. In the dark, a convoy moves like it has rehearsed this moment 100 times. Unmarked SUVs, a box truck, a van with no markings, headlights off, running lights only, no sirens, no drama, just timing, just control. Inside one command vehicle, a laminated map rests on a clipboard. 5 locations circled, 2 marked primary, 3 marked secondary, and one line, highlighted in red, carries the words that would later set the city on fire with speculation. A municipal administration office. This wasn't a border seizure. This wasn't a port. This was downtown adjacent, city-facing, ordinary on the outside, exactly why it mattered. The number repeated in the pre-brief isn't a slogan, it's a weight, 9,700 pounds. The second number is worse because it tries to translate weight into consequence, $440 million. And the third fact, the one that turns a case into a national argument, is that multiple federal components are on the same operations plan. When that happens, it usually means the file has stopped being one kind of case and started becoming something else. If you want the full case file logic, how these operations build, how they move, and why Dawn is chosen, type case file in the comments and stay with me because what happened next wasn't about one office. It was about a pipeline. The case didn't begin with a raid. It began with an anomaly. That's how most federal cases begin, a pattern that doesn't fit. Paper that looks clean until it's stacked next to transfers, contract awards, and phone records. The first flag wasn't cinematic, it was administrative. A vendor line item that appeared too frequently across unrelated budgets. A billing cadence that looked like it was engineered to stay below internal review thresholds. A chain of subcontractors that made sense in isolation, but not when you mapped addresses and found mailbox stores, shared managers, and repeated contact numbers. Investigators don't need a confession to start. They need a map. Money always draws one. The working file carried a plain name in internal folders, the kind of name meant to be forgettable. In the early weeks, it lived in spreadsheets and audit trails, a fraud probe, a financial crimes angle, suspicious vendors, shell entities, deposits that moved fast and clean, then vanished into a blur of withdrawals, cashier's checks, and layered accounts that looked designed to exhaust any single analyst. The file should have stayed there. It didn't, because the same names that appeared in invoices began surfacing in places that invoices don't explain. Storage units, rental trucks, short-term leases, after-hours access logs, night movement along predictable corridors. The fraud trail started touching logistics. Logistics started touching surveillance. And then came the crossover every task force waits for and fears. The fraud trail touched narcotics. Not street-level narcotics. Bulk movement, distribution weight, the kind that requires staging, transport, protection, and silence. Once that threshold is crossed, the question changes. It stops being who stole the money and becomes who is moving product and who is shielding the routes. Because routes aren't protected by luck. They're protected by access. Access is the difference between a reckless operation and a durable one. A durable operation survives because it can purchase legitimacy. Paperwork, approvals, inspections, and the quiet absence of questions. That's where the municipal target mattered. Not because a public office is a warehouse, it usually isn't. Because a public office can be a switchboard, a place where a network doesn't store product but stores permission, a place where a phone call can solve a problem, a place where a vendor can become verified, a complaint can be redirected, a site can get inspected on the wrong day, a file can be misplaced until it's irrelevant. A switchboard doesn't move drugs with its hands. It moves drugs by moving systems out of the way. The file's turning point wasn't a shootout. It was a flagged payment, one that didn't match deliverables, then a contract that didn't match the work described, then an invoice sequence that appeared to be copied, with only dates and amounts adjusted to create the illusion of separate services. The investigators built a timeline. They laid financial activity alongside calendar metadata from legitimate meetings and appointments. And then the pattern emerged. Certain vendor names kept appearing near municipal scheduling touchpoints. Visitor logs, procurement discussions, routine check-ins that, on the surface, looked like any city's vendor ecosystem. Not proof by itself. Pattern. And in federal work, pattern becomes pressure. Pressure becomes warrants. Warrants become dawn. By the time entry teams stage in the dark, the case has already lived for months. Surveillance has already run. Phone data has already been mapped. Financial charts have been drawn, revised, and hardened for court. The goal is not chaos. The goal is control. Control of people, control of evidence, control of the story. Suspects will try to tell later when the door opens and everything changes. A professional seizure doesn't start when a safe is opened. It starts when chain of custody is written. That's why evidence bags are pre-labeled with time blocks. That's why devices get isolated before anyone can touch a keyboard. Because in court, the loudest moment of the raid is irrelevant if your evidence can't survive cross-examination. And cross-examination doesn't care about drama. It cares about whether a device was connected to a network after seizure. It cares about whether a photo was taken before an item was moved. It cares about whether an agent can testify, under oath, that no one had the opportunity to alter the scene. At 0521, the staging begins. 2 blocks away from the municipal building, officers in winter gear tighten straps, gloves, face coverings, agency identifiers visible, not for show, for clarity. Someone checks the breaching kit. Someone checks cuffs. Someone checks the evidence collection materials. In the command vehicle, the final brief is short. Primary objective, secure the municipal office fast. Secondary objective, secure digital systems and paperwork before they can be destroyed. Tertiary objective, coordinate parallel hits on storage and warehouse sites tied to the same network. One mistake can ruin it. One phone call from inside can trigger wipes, burns, and shredding. One message can send someone out the back door with a device in their pocket that carries the entire structure. That's why it happens at dawn. Dawn catches people between schedules, between lies, between confidence and panic. This wasn't negligence. This was design. And design collapses when timing is taken away. At 5:29, the first team moves. Boots crunch on salt and ice. A door camera catches a shadow, then goes dark as a gloved hand covers the lens. Then the breach. Not a movie breach, a real breach. Quick, violent, contained. A door gives. The team flows in. Inside, the air smells like stale heat and cleaning chemicals. Fluorescent lights buzz. Someone shouts compliance. Someone moves left. Someone moves right. The office isn't supposed to hold much. That's the point of using an office. Paper looks innocent. Computers look normal. A desk looks like a desk. But in corruption cases, the office is rarely the warehouse. The office is the switchboard. The first finds are boring to civilians and critical to investigators. Multiple phones, not just one, 2 laptops, sealed envelopes, a keyring with storage tags, a binder labeled with neutral language, program coordination, vendors, community services. Nothing on the cover screams crime. Inside, the organization begins. Lists, codes, vendor onboarding notes, routing instructions that don't match public-facing work. Evidence techs arrive and freeze the scene. They photograph before moving anything. They log screen states. They isolate devices from networks. They place electronics into signal-blocking containers where appropriate. They don't need to find a smoking gun in the first minute. They need to ensure whatever they find can live through court. The raid is a clock event. The evidence is a long war. Across the city, other teams move. A storage unit complex near an arterial road, a warehouse near an industrial strip, a rental property used for meetings, a small storefront with the look of a normal business and the function of a transaction front. The operation is synchronized pressure. That's how loops are broken. Because the networks that survive do so by compartmentalizing. Paperwork in one place, product in another, cash elsewhere, devices moving constantly, responsibilities split so no one person can burn the whole operation down if they panic. But compartmentalization has a weakness. If you hit multiple compartments at the same time, you force the network to react without coordination. And when reaction becomes improvisation, mistakes happen. Mistakes become probable cause. Probable cause becomes the next warrant. The warehouse hit isn't loud. The lock is cut. The door rolls up, and the smell changes immediately. Cardboard, plastic wrap, fuel. Pallets stacked in a way that doesn't match the labels. Household supplies, furniture parts, seasonal goods, normal words, wrong weight. The team moves methodically. They photograph, measure, and open with procedure. The first discovery isn't a mountain of drugs in plain sight. It's something more dangerous because it's engineered. Hidden compartments inside hollowed crates, false bottoms, void spaces built to survive casual inspection. Packages inside, dense and uniform, sealed with a consistency that signals industrial handling. Field tests are performed according to protocol. Then items are sealed again and logged. Because a controlled seizure is a legal weapon. It doesn't just remove contraband. It creates leverage. It creates charges. It creates the ability to flip people who thought they were protected. The headline numbers, 9,700 pounds and $440 million, are the kind of figures that circulate online because they shock. The case file logic is colder and more useful. How many sites, how many shipments, how many routes, how many accounts, how many people touch the chain? Even if a number gets challenged later, the architecture remains. Routes, fronts, accounts, intermediaries. A network is the headline. The deeper agents dig, the more the file suggests dual use. Fraud money building infrastructure, infrastructure moving product, product profits protecting the fraud. A loop. And loops are hard to break unless you hit them in multiple places at once. This wasn't negligence. This was design. While evidence teams work, a parallel effort runs quietly in the background, preserving digital truth. Devices are triaged. If a computer is live, investigators document what's on screen before any interaction. If a phone is seized, it's treated as both evidence and threat because it can be remotely wiped. Investigators are racing not just suspects, but time, encryption, and the simple fact that one person who thinks fast can destroy months of work in seconds. That ticking pressure is why cases like this go heavy at dawn. It's why they move in stacks of vehicles with running lights only. It's why they don't want sirens. Sirens broadcast the start. And the start is what triggers the burn. The public almost never sees the part that matters most. After the scene is frozen and the obvious items are collected, the operation shifts into what civilians experience as nothing happening. That's when the file expands. Analysts begin reconciling seized data with known financial flows. Names and contact lists get mapped to bank accounts. Addresses get cross-referenced with lease records and utility registrations. Small inconsistencies, meaningless alone, become meaningful in combination. A storage unit payment source used for multiple units. A vehicle fleet managed under a third-party name. A rental property leased by someone who doesn't appear to have the income to lease it. A business storefront that processes transactions unrelated to its advertised service. A series of expenses that look like maintenance but correspond to load dates. Investigators don't need a dramatic confession. They need to prove an enterprise. They need to show structure. Structure is what makes conspiracy charges heavy. Structure is what turns a bust into a dismantling. In this reconstruction, one antagonist remains consistent because the file needs a face. Not for the camera, for the courtroom, the procurement gatekeeper, the person who sits where procurement touchpoints become permission, the person who can create clean documents or delay scrutiny, the person who can manage who gets access to the building, who gets time on a calendar, who gets a vendor approval, who gets pushed into the system. A network can move product without them, but it can't survive at scale without someone controlling legitimacy. That's why the municipal office was circled in red. Not because it held contraband, because it held access. And access is the difference between a pipeline that leaks and one that flows. If you're still watching and you understand what that means, hit like now, because the next part is where these cases turn from raid footage into consequences. The aftermath phase begins with freezes, account holds, forfeiture filings, subpoenas that fan outward like shockwaves. Bank compliance teams get notices. Property managers get calls. Business partners get visited. The network starts bleeding oxygen. People who thought they were safe behind contracts discover that contracts don't shield criminal exposure. People who thought they were small realize they're listed as nodes in someone else's map. The most dangerous moment for the network is not the breach. It's the first week after, when everyone is talking to everyone else, and investigators are listening for the mistake that reveals the next door. Then comes the quiet phase that rarely trends. Interviews. First contact interviews, not courtroom theater. The room is fluorescent, the chair is cold. The person across the table is trained to wait. In these interviews, the first questions aren't threats. They're precise. Who gave you access? Who said this was protected? Who moved the money? Who moved the product? Who scheduled the handoffs? Who told you the route was safe? The network can survive one raid. It can't survive the truth. When insiders talk, the case grows teeth. A confession isn't always a confession. Sometimes it's an admission of structure. There's a boss, there's a schedule, there's a handoff, there's a list. Once investigators have structure, they can map it. Once they can map it, prosecutors can shape the direction of charges that typically appear in cases built like this: conspiracy, trafficking, money laundering, wire fraud, and, if the structure supports it, enterprise pathways. In federal court, scale is gravity. The bigger the scale, the heavier the consequences. There is also a human dimension that investigators treat carefully because it can contaminate a case if mishandled. Networks often hide behind legitimate operations, housing, transportation, community services, and use vulnerable individuals as shields. Some people are coerced, some are exploited, some are simply placed near danger so they can be blamed if the structure is exposed. That's why protective interviews and welfare checks become part of the operational plan when a file touches public-facing systems. There is always someone who didn't understand the full picture until the day the door broke open. There is always someone whose life collapses not because they were the architect, but because they were near the machinery. The justice system tries, imperfectly, to separate rumor from record. The case file is built to survive court, not social media. That doesn't make it gentle. It makes it deliberate. Now zoom out. Why do stories like this go viral? Because they hit three nerves every time: authority, betrayal, scale. People can handle small crime. They can't handle the idea that a public-facing office might be used as a shield for something larger. Even the suggestion triggers outrage, fear, and obsession. That obsession is why 3-minute-ago packaging works. It feels immediate. It feels urgent. It feels like you're watching the system crack in real time. But the case file reality is slower and sharper. Cases take months, sometimes years, and when they move all at once. If you want the follow-on phase in the next episode, the phase where subpoenas widen, phones unlock, and the gatekeeper becomes a defendant, type aftermath in the comments. Because the aftermath is where names turn into charges and charges turn into sentences. In the days after a synchronized operation like this, the network's behavior changes. That change is detectable. Calls spike, movements become erratic, people relocate devices, cash gets moved, storage units are abandoned or suddenly visited after months of quiet. A vehicle that used to move on a schedule suddenly sits. Someone who used to be careful becomes reckless. Those are tells, and tells become new warrants. The first raid is rarely the final raid. It's the first clean cut, the moment you separate the network from its tools: phones, servers, cache storage, vehicle access, and document control. Once those tools are seized, the network becomes clumsy. Clumsy networks make mistakes. Mistakes become probable cause. Probable cause becomes the next door opening at dawn. At the center of the file is a question that prosecutors and investigators care about more than any viral number: who touched the switchboard? Because the switchboard turns street crime into institutional risk. It turns a drug case into a governance problem. And once a file reaches that point, it is no longer just about what was seized. It becomes about what was enabled, whether safeguards failed, whether oversight was bypassed, whether warnings were ignored, whether the public will ever know the full extent. In complex cases, full extent can take years to surface through discovery, through pleas, through testimony, through documents that don't trend. They just exist. In courtrooms, in evidence lockers, in sealed filings. The ending of a case like this is rarely fireworks. It is process. It is paperwork. It is sentencing math. It is the slow, public unspooling of what was hidden. That's why the most important takeaway isn't the raid footage, it's the mechanism. If a network can allegedly operate inside normal systems, contracts, offices, vendors, logistics, then the problem isn't only enforcement. The problem is incentives, fraud incentives, corruption incentives, silence incentives. Every time a system rewards silence, it creates space for the next operation to grow. This wasn't negligence. This was design. And design can be rebuilt unless it is confronted as design. If you believe public institutions should never become shields for criminal pipelines, subscribe for the next case file breakdown, because the follow-on phase is where the facade collapses, not from a helicopter shot, but from a sentence spoken under fluorescent light. One sentence, one name, one map completed. And once the map is complete, dawn comes again. Raids don't end stories. They start them. This is only the beginning.